Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is May 12. Today, as we continue in our daily Bible reading, we begin to read about the establishment of Solomon's kingdom. We saw yesterday that Solomon's father David died and left the kingdom in the hands of Solomon himself. We saw that there was a little bit of a conspiracy with Adonijah, who was trying to sort of usurp the throne with a bloodless coup, but he was thwarted, and Solomon ultimately is anointed to be king over Israel. We saw David's final words to Solomon and some of the things David had asked Solomon to take care of, including some relationships with various individuals in David's kingdom. And in today's reading, as Solomon is trying to secure the kingdom, as he's trying to make peace in the land, as he's trying to, you might say, tie up loose ends, he starts to fulfill some of those requests that his father David had made of him. Now, Solomon, because he is king, is going to take the authority to make some various decisions, take some various actions to try to smooth things out for the nation of Israel. And Solomon is going to become known as a king of peacetime, a king of great peace. That is one of the things to which God refers to David when saying this is the reason he wants Solomon to build his temple, because David is a man of war, but Solomon is a man of peace. So as we start to look at Solomon's early reign, we see some interesting things that take place. First of all, Adonijah comes back into the picture. Last we saw Adonijah, yesterday he was humbling himself before the king, basically acknowledging defeat and acknowledging that Solomon was the king. But now Adonijah begins in today's reading by going to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, to ask her to consult with the king because Solomon will listen to Bathsheba. And Adonijah has a request. He wants to marry a young woman named Abishag. Now that name may be familiar because we mentioned it briefly yesterday. But Abishag is the young maiden who was appointed to take care of King David in his later years, to keep him warm, to keep him provided for, to take care of him as he aged and ultimately died. Now, Adonijah is suddenly interested in marrying Abishag. So Bathsheba agrees to go to Solomon and make this request on behalf of Adonijah. It's interesting that Adonijah basically says to Bathsheba, the kingdom was taken from me. I had already become king, and Solomon took it from me. And that's kind of his argument for why Bathsheba has some sort of debt to him. She needs to make things right. So Bathsheba goes to Solomon. She tells him of Adonijah's request, and Solomon is infuriated. He sees this not simply as a request for marriage. He sees it as an attempt at yet another conspiracy to turn people against him. And so, as a result, he has Adonijah executed. Just like that, Adonijah is executed. Then Solomon goes on from there and he removes Abiathar as the priest. Now remember, both Joab, David's commander of the army, and Abiathar, David's priest, are involved in the conspiracy with Adonijah. They are giving their support to Adonijah. So now Solomon removes Abiathar from the priesthood, and it's interesting that he doesn't kill him, and for this reason, listen to these words. He says to Abiathar, "You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships." So in memory of that, in the good things that he did for his father David, Abiathar's life is spared, but he is removed as a priest and he's removed from living there in Jerusalem. Next, we read about the fate that comes to Joab. Joab hears of what Solomon has been doing, what he has done to Adonijah and having him killed, what he has done to Abiathar, having him removed as priest, and Joab panics. He runs to the tent of the Lord and he grabs onto the horns of the altar. Does that sound familiar? That's exactly what Adonijah did. It's kind of a dramatic way of protesting. And Joab is there at the altar holding onto the horns when Solomon sends Benaiah to kill him. And Benaiah tells Joab, come on out, and Joab refuses. He says, I'm going to stay here holding on to the horns of this altar until I die. So Benaiah goes back and reports to Solomon what Joab has said, and Solomon basically says, okay, let him have it his way. So Benaiah strikes down Joab and kills him right there. After Joab is then executed, Benaiah is elevated to the position that Joab had held for Solomon's father, that is, the commander of the army, and Zadok is elevated to the position of priest that's been vacated by Abiathar. Then Solomon is going to deal, as David had asked, with Shimei. Remember, Shimei is the one who had called down curses on David and his men when he was fleeing from Absalom earlier. David had spared him at that time, but Solomon calls in Shimei and he says, I'm going to make a deal with you. You stay in Jerusalem. You're going to be confined to the city of Jerusalem. If you stay in Jerusalem, I won't take your life. I won't kill you. But if you leave for any reason, then I will kill you. Well, everything seems to be good, and Shimei agrees to the conditions of this pardon, you might say. But 3 years pass, and then some of Shimei's slaves escape to another land, and he goes after them, leaving Jerusalem. When Solomon hears that he has left Jerusalem, even though it's been 3 years since their agreement, he has Shimei executed and tells him, you violated our deal. Remember, I said if you ever leave Jerusalem for any reason, you'll be killed. And so he kills Shimei. And that kind of puts a nice bow on the package with his promises to his father David, as David had offered his parting words to Solomon. Then Solomon makes an alliance with Egypt and marries Pharaoh's daughter. And then we read probably the most important and the most memorable event of Solomon's reign. And that is, during this time, there are a number of high places where people are worshiping. And we're told that Solomon follows in the ways of his father David in worshiping God, but that he also sometimes offers sacrifices or burns incense at the high places. Well, on one occasion, we read of a dream that Solomon has while he is at Gibeon, where the tent of the Lord is located. And while Solomon is in this dream, God tells Solomon, he appears to Solomon and says, you can ask for whatever you want and I'll grant it. Now, anyone may have expected a king to ask for power, to ask for fame, to ask for wealth, to ask for the destruction of his enemies, but Solomon asks for none of that. He asks God to give him a discerning heart, because this is an intimidating task to be the ruler over these people who belong to God. He says, I'm just a child and I don't know how to be an effective ruler, so would you just grant me a discerning heart or wisdom that I might know how to govern your people? Well, God is so pleased with this request, and that he didn't make a selfish request, that God answers him and makes him the wisest man of all time. But he also grants him the things he didn't ask for. He gives Solomon wealth and power and fame and all of those other things. Today's reading closes with a reminder of how wise Solomon is when a couple of women are arguing over a dead baby. Whose baby is alive and whose baby is dead, and who had done the switch. And Solomon asks for the sword to divide the baby in half, and the true mother objects and says, no, I don't want to kill the baby, give it to her. While the false mother, or the phony mother, we might say, says, go ahead, let's divide him. Solomon says, give the baby to the first woman. She is his mother. And his fame spread far and wide because of this great judgment he had made. People began to see that Solomon has wisdom from God to administer justice. And this is only the beginning of Solomon's rise to fame, his rise to power, his rise to wealth, simply because he trusted in God enough and was humble enough to ask for the gift of a discerning heart, the gift of wisdom. I think it would be wise for all of us today to ask for the same thing, to humbly approach our God in prayer and ask him not for all the things we want for ourselves, but why not pray the same prayer? God, would you give me a discerning heart, the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, so that I might honor you with my life and bring you the glory. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.